Namaskar. I am Nandini Sahu, Vice Chancellor, Hindi University, West Bengal, and Professor of English, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi, India. I thank the organizers of this international conference for having given me this opportunity to talk about my research vis-a-vis indigenous knowledge systems. The particular title of my lecture today is Indigenous Knowledge Systems, Decolonial Terms, and Social Development. My research on indigenous knowledge systems and the decolonial term and social development, it situates itself at the crossroads of literature, culture, and politics of knowledge. The things that are at stake here vis-a-vis indigenous knowledge systems are the recognition that knowledge is never neutral, isn't it? Knowledge is always produced, archived, legitimized within the power structures. The colonial modernity systematically, delegitimized indigenous epistemologies, the oral traditions, performative archives, ecological practices, and community based worldviews. By branding indigenous knowledge systems as primitive, irrational, or pre modern, we have been doing only disservice to indigenous knowledge systems rather than any positive contribution. So, these kind of international conferences are very, very important where we create dialogues vis-a-vis the authenticity of indigenous knowledge systems, the need of bringing indigenous knowledge systems to the university tables, creating research and research methodology with reference to the indigenous knowledge systems and the national education policy that gives so much of importance to the indigenous knowledge systems and the Indian knowledge systems. Yet, despite centuries of suppression, these epistemologies endure. They survive. They are a part of our teaching, research, and pedagogy, which is very, very encouraging and very important. They survive in folk literatures, performative art forms, ecological practices, communal or societal memory in the form of mnemoculture, memory studies. In the year 2007, where the entire country had not become aware about or very conscious about anything called indigenous knowledge systems or Indian knowledge systems, I proposed the PG Diploma program in Folklore and Culture Studies for Indira Gandhi National Open University, my university, and it was accepted overwhelmingly. Thousands and thousands of students joined the program. Thousands of pages of study material became open access material for the whole world. And eventually, I converted that PG diploma to MA in Folklore and Culture Studies. And very recently, also, I designed a course on Hindu studies and Indian knowledge systems for my university. Apart from designing multiple courses on American literature, British literature, linguistics, children's literature, and all those canonical studies as they call, my deep engagement with folk literature and Indian knowledge systems have taken me to be a part of decolonizing the literature departments in India. Your seminar resonates with my thinking that we should not get rid of anything that we have been trained with. We need not get rid of our British or American literatures in the departments, but at the same time, indigenous knowledge systems and Indian knowledge systems should enter our departments in a big way through compulsory courses. The decolonial turn, a critical movement advanced by thinkers like Walter Munro and then Nuwa Thinglo, these things, this turn, it calls not merely for recovering indigenous knowledge systems but disrupting the epistemic hierarchies that structure modernity. It is an invitation to rethink social development, not as an unilinear modernization but as a pluriversal negotiation with the departments. And for this particular research, I propose a few research questions and themes that you may take further in this international seminar. The theoretical foundations of Indian knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge systems may be discussed. The decolonial turn and its intervention in the knowledge politics of the country may be engaged with. Folk literature and folk theory as epistemic sites may be brought to the limelight. Archiving, documentation, pedagogy, these things may be discussed. And here I request you to go through the entire study material of MA FCS, MA in Folklore and Culture Studies from IGNO website, which is open access. Almost 20,000 pages of study material on Indian knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge systems, which I have uploaded, will be certainly very helpful for all of you, where you are taking ideas from this particular seminar of decolonizing the departments. The next research question for this seminar can be the role of Indian knowledge systems in rethinking contemporary social developments. Indigenous knowledge systems refer to the dynamic community-based epistemologies encompassing cosmology, ecology, oral traditions, performative rituals, and ethics. Unlike the Eurocentric epistemologies, Indian knowledge systems are oral and performative. They are transmitted through songs, storytelling, rituals, folk theory, folk theatre, folk performances, so on and so forth. Then they are holistic because they link ecology, medicine, art, spirituality, and livelihood into one kind of interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary framework. And then they are relational, they are grounded in community ownership rather than only on individual authorship. They are embodied, they are experiential knowledge rooted in practices of agriculture, healing, storytelling, mostly oral storytelling. For example, the bowl songs of Bengal, they embody a syncretic mysticism that critiques organized religion while theorizing about the body as a spiritual site, like I would quote Capwell. Then, Santhal oral narratives, they preserve histories of rebellion against the colonial rule. Britishers were the first of the categories or the groups who created folklore research in India in a systematic manner, but at the same time, the histories of rebellion against the Britishers vis-a-vis Santhal communities and many of those have been something that the Britishers have given us back. So we are countering the colonial archives erasers. And the Khasi legends of Yutal, they embody indigenous ethics of social justice and collective resistance. Indian knowledge systems are not static. They are constantly negotiating modernity and globalization, while they aim to retain community-centered epistemic authority. I am glad that in your seminar, you are taking up these topics in a big way. Many of the papers that I was going through, they talk about globalization, modernity vis-a-vis indigenous knowledge systems. We are truly taking the decolonial turn today. The decolonial turn, as it's a part of your lecture, your topic, it's a philosophical and methodological shift that critiques coloniality as an enduring structure beyond political independence. Annual Quanicho's concept of coloniality of power, it shows how modernity and coloniality impose hierarchical racial and epistemic orders on a particular society. And then Walter Manilow, he emphasizes epistemic disobedience, I am quoting, delinking from Eurocentric categories of knowledge. And then Nuawa Thongo, he calls for colonizing the mind through language, storytelling, and the reclamation of indigenous cultural frameworks. So, in this kind of seminars, we talk about those theoretical frameworks and then we bring them to the practical aspects through Indian literary discourses. The 24 official languages of India approved by the Constitution, and the 7,000 tribal and folk languages, their orality, and then cultural exchange of these languages through translation. These are the things that your seminar can actually discuss coming 2 days. In literary and cultural context, this means foregrounding indigenous archives, archiving and documentation, and a creation of a new knowledge system, and then sharing that knowledge system, because knowledge sharing is knowledge production. So this seminar can be a ground of knowledge production. Let me give you examples from Mahashweta Devi's retelling of the tribal oral histories. The characters resist folklorization by centering subaltern epistemologies, and then again they problematize the issues thereof. By reading the characters of Mahashweta Devi, you know a folk society. Again, coming to Northeast Indian oral epics, they disrupt the nationalist homogeneity by preserving community-specific cosmologies. You can go to Dalit and Adivasi autobiographies. They highlight collective suffering and memory as counter histories. Probably these texts can be a part of your seminar and a part of your discourses. The decolonial turn is not addictive, including indigenous knowledge, but it is transformative. Through the decolonial turn, you can construct the epistemic foundations of what counts as knowledge and development. You can freely talk about folk literature and folk theory. Take the texts, theorize them through new historicism, cultural materialism, come up with interesting research in this kind of a seminar. Folk literature is not simply a cultural residue, but it is an epistemic archive. Scholars and theorists like Alan Dundes, they have argued that folklore itself is theory. Each proverb, myth or ritual embodies philosophical insights. Like proverbs encode ecological and social wisdom, like the Santhal sayings on monsoon lyrics guiding the agriculture. Even there are Rudali songs. There are songs for every occasion: birth, death, wedding, then bidai of the girl. Then there are myths. They provide cosmological explanations and ethical codes, like the Nagaland myths linking human kinship with nature. Today we talk so much about Anthropocene, and the myths lead us towards that. And there are epics like the Alakand, and then they embody historical memory and ethics of valor, kinship, and resistance. There are performances. Look at the Chou dance from Odisha, or Tamasha from Maharashtra, or the pedagogical sides thereof, transmitting the cosmologies, gender politics, and community identity. Folk texts and performances act as the philosophical and theoretical discourses in their own right. They are independent texts. Archiving, documentation, and pedagogical approaches are the questions which are very, very crucial. Who can archive and who cannot? What are the copyright issues? Are we actually taking care of the intellectual property rights when we are bringing folklore or indigenous knowledge systems to our academic discourses through these seminars and the course material or the research that we are doing and publishing? These are difficult questions, very tough questions. You must ask these questions to yourselves before you actually bring those things to your publications. They are very sensitive, so be sensible when you bring those to your publications. Colonial archives are criticized, they are fossilized indigenous traditions by many, by a rigid school of thought of folklore, stripping them of context and agency. Now, this seminar should be a platform to create context for folklore, to create agency for folklore. The challenge today is to archive without colonizing. You should not go from the frying pan to the fire. Do not colonize folk literature any further. Do not romanticize folk literature from a distance. Rather, bring it to the table. Create digital archiving projects through digital humanities and post-truth kind of researches. You can take them to the tribal languages and you can make them participatory and consensual. People who are the subjects for you, quote unquote, there should be consensus from them. You have to convince them that the rich cultural heritage should be taken to academic platforms. Use lot of field study when you are a folklorist. Ethnographic documentation should avoid extra activism. Instead, it must embody reciprocity with the communities. Like I already said, performance documentation should not authenticize, but it should situate the rituals in their lived social contexts. Look at, again, I would repeat, look at the IGNO MAFCS, Master of MA in Folklore and Culture Studies program. And it is a pioneering institutional model. It foregrounds documentation and archiving of folk texts and performances. There are many, many literary texts. There is nothing like Indian folk literature in English. So when it is folk literature, it has to be any of our bhasha literatures vis-a-vis folklore in English translation. And MAFCS program has done that. We have translated and we have made them a part of our research. The interdisciplinary pedagogy linking folklore with development, environment and cultural studies is something that you must emphasize. Critical research methodologies that validate oral traditions as legitimate epistemologies should be your care and concern. And this initiative, like this seminar, it should demonstrate how indigenous knowledge can be academically institutionalized without being appropriated. Let me repeat myself. Indigenous knowledge systems should be institutionally preserved without being appropriated, sustaining both scholarship and community agencies. And then indigenous knowledge and social development, they go hand in hand. Development defined solely in terms of industrial explanation of the GDP growth, it reproduces some kind of colonial paradigm. And indigenous epistemologists, they offer the alternative modern models of social development. You just come out of the colonial paradigms. This is time for a paradigm shift. Create an alternative model. So this kind of seminars should create those alternative models for the scholars and the youngsters. You should talk about ecological sustainability, traditional water harvesting in Rajasthan. Look at that. Zebo systems in Nagaland or sacred groves in Meghalaya. They embody climate resilient practices through folk practices. Look at the indigenous cooking, the cuisine. Look at the indigenous spices, masala. So these are a part of our ecological sustainability. Why not talk about them in your seminar? Next, gender relations. Matrilineal systems among the Khashi and the Garo communities, they challenge the patriarchal inheritance structures. So these are the best practices of folklore. Why not talk about them in the contemporary modern society and then make those good practices a part of our own lives? Then folklore can be a part of conflict resolution. Community councils like Darbar in the Meghalaya, they exemplify patriarchy and the participatory democracy. Then healthcare like Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani and the tribal medicinal systems, they provide holistic frameworks that can complement biomedicine. I said, like allopathy medicine is peer reviewed and Ayurvedic and homeopathy medicines may not be peer reviewed. So why not take the Ayurveda, Siddha and these kind of medicines as something to complement the biomedicine and then something to supplement rather than substitute. Such examples reveal how Indian knowledge systems contribute to pluriversal developments where many knowledge systems coexist and contribute to the human flourishing, human growth and development. Weaving these figures into your theoretical arguments in the coming 2 days, talking about the literary and folk texts, folk poetry, folk novels, folk theatre, folk drama, the best practices, then comparative world literatures through folklore, comparing Indian folklore with the Western folklore. These things may actually be your points of reference. I wish you all the very best for this very important international seminar. Good scholars, participants are here. I hope you are going to have a very interesting and important seminar. Coming 2 days will produce new knowledge systems and you contribute to the world folklore in a big way through the seminar. Many congratulations to the organizers and the participants. Thank you and namaskar.